Good. I hope you're managing to tune in. We're fortunate we have a nice screen of trees on the other side of these blinds, so it'll help us a little bit to keep out of the heat of the day. But if there's anything practical like that, please let us know straight away if you need it to be cooler or any of those things. I try and keep the microphone a little bit further away from my mouth also, but I hope it's still easy for everybody to hear okay. I've also now got one of these. Wow. Great. All right. So I hope we can pick up through the time some of these themes we've been already introducing. Because in the end, of course we want to deal with making the world a better place. So somehow that's our number one intention. But actually even more profound than that in a sense is, in order to allow that to happen, what our suggestion is, we need to get to know God much better and create a much better relationship with God, and through that also become a better person. And then we're going to bring about a revolution. And this is essentially the work that all the great religious traditions have been involved in, and where they've really performed their role to the best possible end. So whenever the world's great religious traditions were really changing people, and changing them by helping to remove this contradiction, between their godly mind, which has desires which were guiding them towards those higher purposes, to those more eternally true things, that when you stick with them, you end up finding a joy which doesn't disappear, which doesn't turn sour, which doesn't become a source of regret, and then how to diminish that other aspect of our nature, which is not resembling God's nature in myself. Where that came from is a big question, of course. But that other nature within me that tends to lead me to do things which are contrary to my own best intentions, against my own best intentions. And when I do those things, I find I betray myself at the same time as betraying God and betraying other people. So that's a very big matter. In a funny sort of a way, what Father Moon says is the best way to address your own problems in the end is by not just focusing on yourself, but thinking more about God and other people. So he always says, well, if only we could solve all of God's problems, we'd end up solving all our own problems. Because in a sense, God's heart or God's love is really, really concerned for everybody. So if we really try to address God's problems, we're going to address everybody's problems and seek to solve everybody's problems. So he's very into this expression, which is quite an extraordinary expression. He talks about we have to liberate God. I mean, for many conventional people who believe in a personal God, it's quite a strange idea, and they might even think it's offensive, because God doesn't need liberating. David was talking this morning about how God is so vast, so huge, so beyond us that we can't even really understand who God is. But Father Moon's point is a very interesting point, because he's thinking about God as a relational God. A relational God. That means God who needs relationships. And we're going to get into that later on today, in the matter about why God created, and who are we to God, and what is the creation to God, and how important it is. So his solution is liberate God, and in the process of seeking to liberate God, you'll liberate all humanity, all human beings. So, whilst on one level then, the reason to study together, or the reason we're recommending this very intensive way of trying to discover more about how to make a better world, what we're saying is, in order to do that, we need to discover more about God. Why discover more about God? Because the concept of God that's in here is God is our origin. God is our creator. God is where we come from. So we can't really understand who we are unless we can understand who is God. And very important point, who am I to God? Who am I to God? Who am I from God's point of view? Very big problem is we don't see things from God's point of view. So that's why, he's an Austrian and I'm an Englishman, and our history hasn't all been nice, and he speaks a different language, and or he's a different color, or he's a different religion, or she's, and then of course we did you see my facial expression? That was supposed to say something beyond words. So, yeah. This type of very, very miserable understanding. But of course, this is definitely cannot be God's point of view from the rational, the principle, because we all come from God. So we would say the truest concept of human rights, for example, what's the value of each human being? That will be rooted in the religious understanding that we're all the creation of God. We're all incredibly precious to God. So this type of view, if we could have God's point of view instead of our own point of view, if we could... Isn't it strange? I've worked for many, many years interreligiously and interculturally, but still sometimes when you meet someone who's very different from you, even though intellectually you understand you shouldn't do it, you feel distance. I remember of course I had seen many, many, many Muslim people for many, many years, but the first time I was placed in a really close personal situation to have a lot of interaction with women in traditional Muslim headscarf, hijab, from a very different culture. Mine, there were Somali women actually from Birmingham, big Somali community in our second city in Birmingham. And I'd never really, I'd seen them, and of course I wasn't prejudiced because I believe in interreligious stuff, but actually I wasn't sure who they were going to be. And then we spent, I think, a weekend together, and we had all this incredible interaction. I could see how dynamic, lively, community organizers these two women were. And then we went out one afternoon to visit a historical place. I was teaching in England. And this historical place was associated with one of our kings, who was very famous because he had 6 wives, not at the same time, one after the other. Some of them had an accident along the way, others died, or different things happened, or he just divorced them. His name's Henry VIII, and he was a very significant person in the expansion of British history in a way. But anyhow, we were walking around this house which was associated with one of his wives, and just chatting to one another, and she shared with me that she's the first of 3 wives for her husband. And I had just been sharing a lot about, one man for one woman, and I've been giving all sorts of lectures about that. Then we walked around this English king's house, and she shared about her life and what it was and how they balanced the family. And it's very, very, very interesting. So what I'm trying to say is, if we have the point of view of God, just because someone looks different or speaks differently or has a different origin, don't get stuck in some wrong point of view. And we have so much in our world still stuck in that problem. So, we need to know about God. So how can we know about God? Well, some people may say through our human experience that we can learn about God. Some people may say through my holy book, be it the Bible, or be it the Quran, or be it any of the other major scriptures. And I would recommend, that David probably has his copy somewhere, this very beautiful anthology, The World Scriptures. It's very interesting to read scriptures that you're not accustomed to. Also, yes, the natural world. The natural world tells us about the Creator, of course. And yes, very interestingly, what about your deeper self? But it would be how to identify the part of you that's genuine in resemblance to God. This is a very important part of oneself to identify, actually. because that's the bit of you out of which to make your best decisions, like Aung San Suu Kyi. I think she made her decisions in life, which were very difficult ones, out of, for goodness, the very best bit of her. And that's the best place to make the decisions out of, otherwise you do something which in the end you profoundly regret. So, here's a quotation again. Most of the quotations I'm going to use, I think almost exclusively in this presentation, will be from the Bible, but actually bit by bit, of course, we need to add in more. When I've been doing lectures over the past many years for our European Leadership Conferences for UPF's Ambassadors for Peace, who come from all different religious backgrounds, we've been very particular to bring in many, many different scriptural quotations. But when Father Moon first put together the Divine Principle book in Korea, actually it was really essentially an appeal to Korean Christians. So the exposition of the Divine Principle is full of biblical quotations. And because he was reaching out to the Korean Christian population through that book. So we need, in a sense, to update some of this aspect. This is an interesting quotation from a Christian saint. Know yourself. He who knows himself will know God. He who knows God will become like God. Anyhow, we're going to use a certain methodology, a certain method. We're suggesting a certain method to get to know about God. It's a very interesting thought. And it's a very, very simple thought. But what it's saying is, this is, who's this? Who painted this one? Any ideas? Renoir. This is Renoir. So isn't it extraordinary? A particular artist, you can make a guess even if you haven't seen that particular painting because they have a particular style. And I just heard a while ago, they just discovered a lot of original works of Picasso just recently. And then no one was aware where these particular artworks were. And the person who brought them to the public notice was the person who had the job managing the security for Picasso's houses. And somehow he suddenly revealed to the foundation for all of Picasso's work that he had all these original artworks. And of course the question was, how did he get them all? Because he was responsible for the security of Picasso's homes, and there's a little bit of a question how he got them all. Anyhow, I don't know if the court case is still going on, but the Picasso Foundation is fighting the method by which he got hold of all these Picasso artworks. But also they were verifying them. They were verifying these original Picasso works. And they could do it, because of course, Picasso's not sort of, 14th century or 15th century or something. You don't need to do dating in those ways, but they could tell through style and I'm sure other aspects. So somehow the artist's character and inner nature is expressed through the artwork in which they make an investment of themselves. So of course Renoir didn't look like that lady or like that little girl, did he? And if you look at Renoir's paintings, you'll see many different faces and images of people on them, and none of them look like Renoir. But something is very particular in the style and in the manner in all that he painted. So what this is expressing is, even if you can't get to meet the artist, you can learn something about the artist from the artwork. The painting came from the artist, so the painting is revealing something about the artist. It's a visible expression of the invisible nature of the artist that lays behind that artwork. This type of idea. Similarly, of course, thinking about also in terms of parents and children. So, my youngest son just went on 1 year of sort of service work. We have a project, as Unifications, we have a project for our young people. They have a chance to do a year of service work. He just did a year of service work. And he got to know a lot of people that maybe know me a little bit. And then a lot of people started to say to me, "Oh, your son is really like you." Somehow, when I see him, I'm reminded of you. And when I look at him, I think, I don't see that at all. Because, parents, of course, we love our children very much, but we tend to have a slightly critical nature as well, because we wish the very best for them. So I look at my 19-year-old and I think sometimes, oh, I wish he was more responsible. And so things like that. You know. I wish he was less thinking about himself and more other people. Things like this, but more and more people are telling me now, he's just a staff on a workshop that's going on. Some people came back from that and said, oh, we saw him there, and actually more and more he's like you. So I'm going to have to revise all my things now. But I'm actually very self-centered and irresponsible, which I didn't think. But anyway. No. But hey, isn't this interesting picture, right? So, evidently, this is parents and child, isn't it? Evidently, this is so. But isn't it also interesting, because I've got 4 children, and of course 2 boys, 2 girls, so of course they're different from one another in that respect, but even the 2 girls are very different from one another, the 2 boys are very different from one another. Because maybe you can see they're Millers, my name's Miller, you know, my family name, but actually they're also very different from one another. It's interesting. But anyhow, from parents, children are coming. So by knowing the child, you can know the parents. It's a methodology of, by looking at the artwork, you can know the artist. By looking at the child, you can know the parents. So in this methodology, how can we know about God? Well, we can know the nature of God by looking at God's works of art, if you like. Oh, I need to get my pointer, don't I? Here we go. My chance to use my pointer. So just as the character of the artist is substantially revealed through the actual works of art, so the invisible nature of God is visibly expressed through the things that God created. In fact, St. Paul wrote about that in his letter to the Romans. And he said, ever since the creation of the world, God's invisible nature, namely God's eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived, seen, in the things that have been made. So we can know God through the creation. But of course, what does that mean then? Clearly it means, you know, look at the flowers, right? Clearly it means God is orange, but also somehow a bit white, and maybe a bit deep red, and there's a bit of purple. You know, of course, there's huge variety in the creation. So you might say, oh, well, then there's huge variety within God. That must be true. But in a sense, to most profoundly understand about God, we would need to find some characteristics in the whole of the creation which everything created possesses. We need to find some universal characteristic that everything that exists possesses. And surely then that would tell you something very profoundly about God. Do you understand? So is God a white man, you know? Is God a black woman?
Yes.
Is God a yellow man?
Yes.
You know, in a sense, God is clearly all of them. They all come from God. So, in other words, to get the most profound things, what nature do all human beings have? This, regardless of skin color, or regardless of eye color, regardless of male or female, you know, what sort of things are there? And reveal the nature of God. So we're going to look for some universal characteristics. You know, this is just another quote from Albert Einstein. I believe in the God who reveals himself in the orderly harmony of what exists. So many times when you look at nature, it's so incredible, it's so extraordinary, that actually we are, in English we say we're in a state of awe, we're in a state of wonder at the incredible beauty of and orderliness of the creation. Just to explain one point in here, we're using scriptural quotations, biblical quotations I mentioned, mainly because the exposition of the divine principles really originally an appeal from Father Moon to Korean Christians. But when we're using it, yes, of course, Christians will clearly say, it says so in the Bible, therefore it's true. Or just as Muslims may say it says so in the Quran, or Sikhs might say it says so in the Adi Granth, or Hindus might say it says so in the Upanishads, or whichever it may be. But actually, that's not just the grounds on which we're using these scriptural references. This is a valid ground, of course, for someone who's a Christian. But what we're really saying is this is the principle, the underlying universal principle, and the Bible supports it, as do other holy scriptures of the world's great religions. And it's extraordinary. Of course, there are great differences between the world's great religions, but also there are huge, and the more essential you get about contents, the more similarities there are. So now we're going to examine the creation, and with the intention of discovering about God. So the invisible God, the invisible cause, how can we discover about the invisible cause? Well, let's look at the created world. And what do we discover? We discover everything has two dimensions: an outer form and an inner quality. The outer form is visible. That visible outer aspect resembles or expresses the invisible inner aspect. What sort of thing is this talking about? What's it talking about? We call these the dual characteristics of outer form and inner quality, if you like. So how can we find some examples of that? Well, here's an example in terms of human beings. This is a very famous 20th century philosopher. The human body is the best picture of the human soul. What an interesting idea. So the human soul, right? So here, our brother's soul, our brother's invisible internal nature. Of course, all we have to do is a quick surgical operation, have a quick look inside, and of course we'll see his soul, or his inner nature. Maybe not. Maybe you can't do it. Maybe you can never do it. Directly, see the soul. But how do you get, or the character, say character if you like. How do you get to know the character of somebody? We do know the character of other people. It's because the invisible character is visibly expressed through,
action.
All sorts of different expressions. I mean, even people can read faces, right? Or ears. Or, people read hands. Yeah, read hands. Lines, lengths of fingers, lengths in relationship to one another, size of your palm compared with the size of your fingers, all these sorts of things, they all tell about you, right? But of course, not everybody's, I'm no good at reading hands. Are you good at reading hands? I'm not good at it. But nonetheless, when you live and are with people, you learn about their invisible nature through their words, through their conduct, through their actions. And you test it out over time, don't you? Because, someone may smile at you and be very nice today, but, you want to check it out over time. That's why, for example, they say you never know your wife or your husband until you finally do get married to them and live together, and then gradually you discover about things you were not aware of, which are not just physical things. You may know about them physically, but you discover qualities of character which emerge over time. So isn't it an interesting thought? The human body is the best picture of the human soul. So what it means is that this visible outer aspect, which is the human body, right, is a picture or resembles or expresses the invisible inner aspect, or the human soul. Or as it says in the principle, in the divine principle, the mind and body are related in that fashion. They're two correlative aspects of a human being. So a human being is not just a mind, a human being is not just a body. A human being is a mind and body united with one another. These are two related aspects of one being. So also these are two related aspects of one being. The inner quality, invisible inner quality, which expresses itself through the visible outer form. So let's try and demonstrate that this is true of everything that exists. Well, of course, human beings, yes, we understand we have an external form, which you can see, which you can touch, a visible, substantial external form. But this external form is not just who I am. Who I am is something not visible, not touchable, not seeable. This internal character of myself, we use this expression here, the heart and mind, this invisible nature, which we cannot see, is manifested visibly through this picture of the human soul. This is the human soul, if you like. This is the picture, the physical body. So what about everything else then? And interestingly, what's the relationship between these two? Where does the essence of the person lie? Does the essence of the person lie here or here? So when we're looking around for the prospective husband or wife, if that's the method you're employing, people are generally very attracted to the ones who look really nice, right? They're attracted to the ones who look really nice. But when you've been married to someone for a while, how nice they look remains maybe important, but nothing like as important as the inner qualities they have. The inner qualities they have become actually much, much more important. And also they're much more important when it comes to, selecting your employees. So when people come to interview for a job, sometimes there may be a preference for someone who looks the way you think you want them to look. So for example, they did experiments in my country about your name and how your name affects whether you get employed or not. And still to this day, despite the fact we have all sorts of legislation, if your name is not an English type of name, you will have a more difficult time getting a job. It's beginning to change. We've seen more and more people who are British, who've come from somewhere else in the world and have a very different name than the traditional British names, who've got great jobs now. But it's, those sort of perceptions. Anyhow, what I'm trying to express is, where does quality reside? I don't know if you remember these famous words from Martin Luther King when he was involved in these big rallies for equality and rights, for black people in America. This famous speech about the dream. I have a dream. And I don't know if I can quote it quite right, probably won't get it quite right, but he said, I dream of a future where the world my children and my grandchildren live in will not be judged on the color of their skins, but the content of their hearts or their souls or their minds. He uses some expression like that. So their quality as human beings. So I think it's very, very clear, quality resides here. In fact, even if your body becomes damaged, even if you suffer accident or disability, still, because your quality, because your value resides here, actually it's not affected by that. So isn't it incredibly inspirational? Aren't the lives of people who have physical disabilities, who overcome them and become great champions, aren't they an incredible inspiration? People who are blind or can't speak or have their legs cut off or whatever it is, who overcome that and do extraordinary things. There's a man who's been running the marathon in England. I can't remember how, but he got severely maybe damaged in war, maybe he was a soldier or something, I don't remember the exact story. But he's doing the marathon. It took him 23 days or something to do the marathon because he's severely disabled and he's like to walk the 26 miles of the marathon. Incredible. So, but there's a relationship between the two. Also had a very interesting experience. I did a period of community service when I was living near Manchester. And I was visiting an area of houses looking for people to help. And I met this amazing family. And in this family, the husband of the family had been a very active seaman, was in the Merchant Navy. But he had a terrible accident and he was totally paralyzed from the neck down. Couldn't move anything. Couldn't speak anymore. And he'd been in hospital, and he was in a hospital room, and it was like just walls. There was a little window up the top, but nothing else. And eventually, this was now, 30 years ago, something like that. Eventually linked him up to one of these machines. It's called a possum. And this machine, you can type by moving your eyes, blinking, and your face muscles. So when they linked him up to him, they taught him how to use it, he typed the message, and the message was, "Get me out of here or let me die." Because he was in this room with nothing. And his wife fought a campaign to get him out of the hospital and bring him home. They wouldn't let her do it because the hospital thought they'd be sued. Do you know sued? They'd be taken to court for negligence if they let him out. But eventually she persuaded him. I visited them in their home and I ended up helping that family. And she made this beautiful room with big glass doors and all the garden and all the little animals and all the little birds and for him. So he could just turn his head and he could see everything. And you could imagine how much he was incredibly, deeply, profoundly grateful to his wife. But also imagine at the same time, imagining what it's like when you can never give your wife a hug, when you can never give her a kiss, when you can never do those things as your body doesn't need. So it's great to have a body through which you can freely express your heart and mind. And it's a privilege to have it, and we should use our bodies very well to do good, to demonstrate love and so on. It's a very important relationship. Anyhow, the point is, not only human beings have that, but also animals have, of course, something that's in a similar relationship to their bodies. And the dimension of it, you might say, is not quite the same as the dimension of the human internal character. It's another level, another dimension, another level in a sense. But they have an instinctual mind which directs their body. So animals do extraordinary things, don't they? I don't know if you have them in Greece, but we just have a program going on at the moment. They put a radio transmitter onto 5 birds. These birds are called cuckoos. And they fly every year from Africa to United Kingdom and other countries in Northern Europe. And they're amazing birds. They lay their eggs in other birds' nests. Have you heard of the cuckoo? Yeah. You probably know the story. It lays its egg in another bird's nest, and with other eggs, and then when the cuckoo comes out of the egg, it pushes all the other eggs out of the nest. And these little birds, they're usually reed warblers, tiny little birds, they feed this growing cuckoo. And the baby cuckoo is about 5 or 6 times as big as the little birds, but they keep on feeding the cuckoo. But mum and dad cuckoo went away long ago. They migrated back to Africa. Baby cuckoo grows up and then gets on the wing and flies by itself to Africa. So they've got these radio mics in 5 cuckoos, and I listen to the same news program on the radio every morning, usually if I'm out driving or doing something. And they're tracking the cuckoos, and all 5 cuckoos now reached Africa. Even the last one arrived in Morocco. And we want to find out how they make their way through the Sahara and down to South Africa. It's really, really exciting. Anyhow, this is the amazing, instinctive mind of the animal. Isn't it extraordinary? How do they do that? It's just totally amazing. And similarly, of course, my second daughter's growing tomatoes in the conservatory. And of course I have grown tomatoes, but it was many, many years ago. And I'm watching the tomatoes grow. And you buy them. We went to this village festival, and bought 3 tomato plants, and we bought them, they were about that big. And of course now they're just huge, growing all over the place, and all sorts of flowers and fruits coming up. Isn't it amazing, how plants have this incredible capacity to take what is fundamentally water and a little nutrition and turn it into this most amazing body, into this most amazing growing plant. And I always can't believe, tomatoes and potatoes. When you see the leaves, you can see they're related, but tomatoes are out there and the potatoes are in the ground, but it's the same family, and one's got its fruits underground in a sense, or the roots, it's the roots, not really the fruits, isn't it? And the other, anyhow, isn't it amazing? And yet, potatoes know they're potatoes, and tomatoes know they're tomatoes, and they both know that they have to get their green bits up to the light and their flowers, and they know what to do. It's amazing. They know exactly what to do. I couldn't turn water and nutrients into fruits, I don't know how to do that. Isn't it extraordinary? So they have an invisible nature which evidences itself in the external form. Plants have intelligence. They know how to behave so that they form themselves and they grow and they produce their fruits, etc. This is not even just true of human beings and animals and plants. It's also true of inanimate, non-living. Of course, living things are made of molecules, atoms and particles, but so are inanimate, non-living things. But even in the structural expression of a molecule or an atom or a particle, we see that they are guided by an invisible nature, a directive nature, which is causing them to behave and relate to each other the way that they do. So if you like, there's an internal character, there's a mind aspect, there's an invisible set of laws which is guiding this visible expression here. So as Einstein declared, isn't it amazing? I believe in the God who is manifested through the amazing order that we see in the created world. It's just so extraordinary. And we are still just discovering about it. And even, the physicists and the scientists, they're putting one set of theories. They just did something with, what is the Great Hadron Collider? What's this thing? They just did some experiments now which proved that one of the key issues about... I'm heading into territory I don't understand now. There's this thing about dark matter, and there's theories about dark matter. Don't ask me any questions. I don't know. But they just did some experiments with this huge experimental equipment in Switzerland, which cast doubt upon the whole idea of the balance between dark matter and the matter that we can observe. So, we don't understand even now how this world works. But definitely, clearly, every external form has behind it an invisible directive nature. So, what the principle expresses, therefore, is if everything God made is like that, it's not surprising to make the conclusion that it's because God is the original source of. God has the original internal character and the original external form, which is the model, if you like, if there's God, God is the model for all of this and the relationship between the two. They come from the same origin, consequently, just like Renoir's paintings, right? They all assume they exist in the same form. And actually, this is extremely insightful. In order to understand how to get my life together, get your life together, and get the world together. Fortunately, I don't have to worry about the tomatoes. Just put in the water, right, and a bit of tomato food. It's okay. But what about my kids? It's easy. I just open their mouths every morning. I pour water in a bit of tomato food. All's well. No! It's not like that. It's not like that. So, how do we get the right relationship between my heart and mind and my body? Now that's a question. That's a question. So for the natural world, it's working fairly automatically, but for myself, it's not so simple. How do you get the right balance between your mind and body? What does that even mean? How do they all connect up to everything else? This is the sort of issue which the principle really investigates. It's very, very interesting. It also helps. What do you see before your eyes?
A vase.
We say in English, this is a vase or a vase. A vase. So this is a vase, but this is a very special vase. I don't know if you can see on there, but it says silver. And then it says Jubilee. And what's that? Do you know what that is? You probably wouldn't know. This is the British royal family's coat of arms, right? This is the Queen's Silver Jubilee. It was the 25th anniversary of her coronation So this looks like a vase, right? Now I'm going to open your eyes to an invisible reality, because this visible external form, which is the vase, is caused by an invisible cause, which you cannot see straight away. But I'm going to reveal it to you, okay? Very interesting. I can't do it with this, I have to do it with that. Aha! Now this is not the same vase. this is not the same vase. This is a wooden vase, if you like. But what do you now realize? What's the vase modeled upon? You know, actually, this vase is made to reflect the form of the human face, right? Now, that particular vase we looked at is very interesting. Now, you don't all know them like I know them, but here is the profile of the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, who happens to be from the Greek royal family, right? That's his profile, very distinct profile. And this profile is the profile of Queen Elizabeth II, his wife. So that's what determined the shape of the vase, right? Not the shape of the vase. The shape of the vase comes from another cause, which is the real cause. That's why it's the Silver Jubilee commemorative vase, right? But you didn't know about that, did you? When you first saw it, you didn't even see that. But, you know, anyhow, this is not exactly what internal character and external form means, not precisely. But you get the understanding. What we say is Tim Miller's mind, character, has a shape. It has a colour. It has a taste. It has a, you know, it's some bits of my inner nature are soft and some bits are hard. It's all sorts of things in my inner nature, but you'll never see it. But you'll see the resemblance. In my external form. As I said, I used to be more of a spaniel. Now I'm a St. Bernard. But hey, something about me remains the same. Yes. So my old friends like Franklin Fortune, despite the fact that I look very different from 30 years ago when we first knew one another, still recognizes me somehow, even after long absences during which my external form changed somewhat. Because something remains the same, you see, so much so that my skinny 2 meters plus, well, not quite 2, maybe almost 2 meters son, you know, people say that he resembles me. I certainly don't think we resemble one another anymore. So, but you get the point. Do you understand? There's some invisible nature which has a shape, which has a colour, as it were, but you'll never see it. But you will see it through the external form. And that external form is caused by that internal nature. So there's a relationship between the two. So interesting, isn't it? What's the relationship? Internal character, I've got to watch my time now. Internal character is the inner invisible aspect. External form is the outer visible aspect. But these are not separate. They are correlative. It means they are two aspects of one being. This aspect is the subject. What does that mean? It means this is the more active element, and this one causes that one to resemble it and respond to it, and then they remain in interaction with one another. So actually, just as your inner aspect governs your outer aspect, so also your outer aspect influences your inner aspect, and they're in a relationship with one another. They're two sides of the same being. One is more the causative aspect, the other's the more effect. This one's causing this one. And also we use this expression, invisible and visible. So this is more invisible. But isn't it interesting? We're going to look at something in a minute. You'll find that if you look at this inner aspect, you can also find within the inner aspect there's two aspects. There's the inner aspect of the inner aspect and the outer aspect of the inner aspect. Say that again. Just as within the whole being you've got an inner aspect and an outer aspect, if you look more deeply inside this aspect, you'll find also there's two aspects within it. One is more internal, it's more invisible. There's something invisible which has some part of it which is even more invisible. And when it's more invisible, what does it mean? It means it's more causative. It's more deciding, you know, what's going to happen. So if you get to the more invisible things, in the end you get to the most decisive things. And it's those things that you need to be aware of, and you need to get right, and then get the right relationship running down through this relationships to get everything right. So what did I find out in my life through my religion? I found that in me, there's the nature of God within me, which is the most invisible part of my mind, if you like. And that bit I really need to get in touch with. Because when I have to make the most important decisions in my life, I need to make those decisions from the deepest, best part of me, which I mustn't betray. And that's what Aung San Suu Kyi made her decision out of, do you understand? It must have been a very tortured decision to decide not to leave Burma and go home to her husband, but to stay there. But I'm very confident, although it was very painful to be separated from her husband and her children, she doesn't have a regret. And I don't think they will do anything but honour her for it, and certainly the world honours her for it, do you understand? Because she made that decision out of some part of her that really feels what's true and right. Very important. Okay, so that's the relationship between these two aspects, and how to get this relationship right. And now, actually, Father Moon's original language is actually Korean. And this, of course, is not written the same way that our language is, but this word here, Seong-sang, refers to this. It refers to the inner aspect. This word here, Hyung-sang, it refers to this. So this is saying the outer aspect, or Hyung-sang, is the second inner aspect, or Seong-sang. So the body is the second mind, if you like. The body is the second mind. So you'll never see someone's mind, but you can see their body, and from their body you can discover about their mind. So it looks a bit now like we're going to make some claims about God out of the sky blue. But please understand, this is not out of the sky blue. This is not just me making a claim or the principle making a claim. This is rooted in understanding the nature of everything that exists. So what this is saying is God will have the original internal character, which is the source, origin and model of the internal characters of everything that exists within the creation. And what does the principle say? It says the internal nature of God, the internal character of God, will reflect the internal character of everything in creation, but most closely it will reflect the internal character of human beings. Why? Because in the order of creation, and we'll look at that more in a minute, human beings are the ones who most closely resemble God. And therefore that internal character of God has at its very center, or if you like, you remember I said this, there's the internal character and the external form, right? Internal character, external form. But within the internal character, there's also a more inner aspect. So this is the more outer aspect of God, God's emotion, intellect, will, God's concepts and laws. But the most internal, invisible quality of God, which determines everything else that God is, all the rest of God's character, originates from, or is as it is because of this quality. And we call this central quality of God heart. And we're going to explain more about it. But very important to understand is this is also the most central quality of every human being. So when we use these principles to work out a theory of education, for example, what we understand is the most important thing to develop and educate in the human being is what we define as heart. Now that's not that one, right? It's again, it's using an analogy, right? Heart is very central to your physical existence, right? But this is talking about a spiritual quality. What is heart? Heart is the impulse out of which love is flowing. It's the impulse to do something for another which will make the other happy, and that through the other's happiness you will feel happy. That's what heart is. So in other words, if everybody has a very developed heart and has a very strong impulse to make other people happy and to give everything they've got to make another person happy, and they live out of that, and if that defines, all the other aspects of their character, which will be different for you, from me, from him, from her, but they're all rooted in heart, then our world will be a good place. Do you understand? If everybody's such a person. So I lived in India for a while, and when I lived in India, I visited people from all sorts of different religions, because in India there's a lot of different religions, right? Went to see bishops and archbishops and Singh Sahibs from the Sikh faith, and Buddhist leaders and Hindu Chankaracharyas and all sorts of people. And what I discovered was, although they were all very different, when I met really sincere people, they were all the same. They were all really different, but they were all the same. I went one time to the Chankracharya of Northern India, who lived in a university, an old building near the University of North Delhi, an old colonial building. And we arrived one morning. I used to arrive and have someone translate for me. Arrived there and sat down there. He was lying on a raised platform where he always was, but this time, when we arrived, he was fast asleep. He was lying on a bed, on top of the raised platform, fast asleep. And the disciples were all sitting there around him, waiting. And he woke up.
Wow.
Composed himself a little bit and began to share with the followers. And to begin with, when I arrived there, because I come from a Church of England background. You never arrive in the church and find a priest lying on the altar, fast asleep. It never happened, I never saw it. So when I arrived, I thought, this is very strange. Very strange. I couldn't comprehend it because it was culturally very different, you understand? But as I thought about it later, I realized what an extraordinary life this man has. Even when he's asleep, he's not private. Even the moment he wakes up, which is not everybody's best moment, right? So what if you wake up in the morning and around your bed there's 15 people? And the moment you get up, you have to be wise and giving and parental and not so simple. So these people are all very different, but some essence, some quality, of living for others and continuously guiding, serving, caring for others was in common. So the principle says this is the essential nature of God, and God's emotion, intellect and will are governed by heart. In other words, true emotion must be governed by an impulse for others, an impulse to make others happy. True intellect should be guided by an impulse to make others happy. Do you understand? So what if you're a very, very clever person, right? But you're very selfish, very, very greedy, very manipulating others, but you're extremely clever. It means that cleverness is cleverness, intellect, do you understand?
Yes.
But it's not godly intellect. Not godly intellect. Because true intellect must be rooted in heart. And then the concepts, the ideas, the laws, the mode of behavior, the pattern of behavior, the lawful expression of the heart is rooted in love. Law is rooted in love. That's what this is saying. It's a very interesting concept. So what is law? It's a rule system, but what should the rule system be trying to hold people to? It should be trying to hold people to love, what love dictates. That's what law should be doing. But if you lose the heart, the law becomes an empty shell. Nothing, no real purpose. Very, very interesting. So, quotations. God is love. The heart is the wellspring of life. So what is heart? Heart is the impulse to experience joy through giving and receiving love. It is the source of motivation for creating. Interesting. In other words, what this is claiming is, why did God create in the first place? God created in the first place out of heart. So if you have love, and then you and your husband are together with one another, and somehow you have a lot of love, for many, many people, what did that mean? It means they would like to have a baby, right? As an expression of a substantiation of their love, and as someone for whose sake they can live, right? So what about if you can't have a baby? What about if you try for years and no babies are coming? This is not simple, right? This is not simple. Because what it means is you have a lot of love, but you have nobody to whom you can show your love, to whom you can give your love. So many people, they seek, in this modern age, they seek ways to have a baby. Or maybe they adopt a child, or whatever. Or maybe they have some other way of investing themselves in other people or a career or whatever. Because everybody who has love is looking for somebody to love. If you have love but you don't have somebody to love, then it doesn't work. So the principle's very simple understanding as to what is the motivation that lies behind creation. It's expressing God is the God of heart. What does that mean? It means God is the relational God. It means God is seeking to find someone to live for, to find someone to have a give and take of love with. So I remember in my life, My wife and I got engaged, and then we spent quite a few years apart because of circumstance. I think of my father's generation. How many people in the Second World War married each other and went off to war and didn't see each other for 4 or 5 years? I have a friend in Kosovo who's a member of parliament there, who during the time of great difficulty for Albanian Kosovans was separated from his wife for about, I think, 13 years. 13 years he was either in prison or in hiding. And that was 13 years after his wife already had 3 kids, and he was separated from her, never saw her. Then how lonely are you feeling? How much are you missing your partner of love? So heart then is the source of motivation for creation. It's the source of meaning. It's the core of the human nature. And actually there are 850 references to it in the Bible. And I'm sure many references to this quality in all the great scriptural writings. So again, this is a very deep topic, and we could talk about it a lot, but we're going to just look at it very shortly. And that is about emotion, intellect, and will. So, of course, the heart expresses itself in different ways. Maybe we would naturally most associate this source of love with a more emotional aspect. And in some sense, that's true. Heart expresses itself very closely through the emotional aspect. But actually, not only through the emotional aspect, also true intellect is an expression of heart. And true will is an expression of heart. So this is a very interesting judge for my life, for myself. How much are my emotions rooted in heart? How much is my intellect rooted in heart? How much is my strong determination or will rooted in heart? And therefore, when you think about education, remember I talked about education before we went off topic afterwards. What's the most important thing about education? What's the most important thing to educate? Most important thing to educate is the heart. Yes. What does it mean, educated? It means let it grow, right? Let it grow. Let the heart grow. Let the feeling to live for others grow. So what should young people learn when they're young? I remember I was at my junior school. Yes. And my junior school was run by an elderly lady who never got married. And when I went to school, I thought she was 80 years old. And after I left school and I was living in my little house, she would walk past the house, gone shopping for the school. The school was 30 little boys, right? That's all that was in the school. And she would come back with the shopping in the trolley, and she was stooped over. And I tell you, she was definitely over 80 before she finished teaching. And she was completely devoted to the children. But she taught all the children to do something, and that was to collect for other children who were in less fortunate circumstances. So she had a special collection box. It was very attractive. It was a big blue egg. And she taught us all to collect money and to bring our toys once we finished with them, to send to children who didn't have any. And I remember my brother and I almost competing to get rid of our toys because we wanted to give them. And I remember going around carol singing at Christmas time. In Christian culture, you go singing to people at Christmas time at the doors with this little box. I would be 8, 9, 10 years old with a little box collecting money, and so happy to have the money, and so happy to feel the box getting heavier. Well, I think about my kids, and I'm really proud of my kids that they went and they served other parts of the world. My big daughter, when she finished school, she went off to Honduras and El Salvador and somewhere else, one of those neighboring countries there as well. 3 countries doing a service project. Really, really great. And each of my children did something like this. And I think that's really important, to go to another part of the world and really help other people. Why? Because it's a chance to grow the heart. So even though I think I look at my youngest one now and I think, should be more responsible. Should be less thinking of himself and more of other people. And yet, maybe he's not on such a bad track after all, because he just spent a year doing things basically for other people. So you need a strong will, but that will must be rooted in having a strong will for the sake of the benefit of others, not for your own sake. Having a very goodly, well-developed intellect, but for the sake of others, not for the sake of yourself. Coming from heart. Maybe very strong emotions, but not strong emotions centering on myself. How damaging is it when your emotions, you have lots of emotion, But your emotions have no concern for others. Do you understand? They're just expressing my anger, my pain, my distress, without any thought or concern for others. Of course, sometimes we have to do that in a sense. But, you don't regard that as a person of maturity. What do parents have to do? They have to restrain their emotions for the sake of their children. They have to root them in love. So this is about the nature of God, but very, very instructive about how we have to check ourselves. In a sense, we're learning about God through looking at ourselves, but also then we learn about how to govern ourselves correctly by thinking about the nature of God. So if you like, this is the internal character of God, at the core of which is the heart, the essence. And then the heart is governing emotion, intellect, and will, and through them, ideas, plans of creation, if you like, principles by which the world of creation will operate, laws. They're coming into being. But these are all invisible. These are all invisible. This is also invisible, but it's less invisible. What does that mean? It means this is the inner character, the invisible inner character, which needs an outward, more visible form through which it can substantiate and express itself. So if you like, this is God's body. God's body isn't visible to us, but it is the energy of God from which everything in the creation is created. This is the original energy. This is the original internal character. This is the original external form. So we're going to examine more about original energy later. We'll get into that later. Maybe we'll touch on it, I think, here a bit. So I'm supposed to finish at 12 o'clock, but I've got a lot more to do, so I'll try and go through it. So what is then God's external form? Well, all matter is made up of particles. All particles are formed from energy. This very famous equation here. Matter springing from energy. Energy is invisible. The external form of God is the pre-energy, the energy behind energy, the invisible energy behind the more visible energy, the intangible energy behind the more tangible energy. So energy is invisible, but the energy of this world is more observable than the energy that came from God, which is the cause of it, but lies behind it and more invisible. But it is the cause. It is the cause. So the external form of God is this pre-energy, right? This one, original energy. And this nature of God, this heart of God, expresses itself through emotion, intellect, will, forms, ideas of creation, laws of creation, and everything that expresses itself through God's energy which comes into the world and creates. We'll look at that in the next section with quite some detail. So quotation here from the Old Testament. It is He, God, who made the earth by His power, who established the world by His wisdom, and by His understanding stretched out the heavens. So many things like this are expressed extremely poetically to try and carry this meaning of how the invisible manifests itself through the invisible, through the visible. So who is God then? In what aspect? God is the God of... Do you remember now which way the colours are around in the pictures? Oh yes, okay. This is the God of original internal character and original external form. And they are not, please understand this diagram, these things are not separated. They don't have separate identities. They're two aspects of one being. So again, about our humanity, what we have to understand is actually religion has many times been about striking the body. You understand? Like fasting, self-denial, self-control. Why is that being so necessary? It's because the mind and body are not in harmony. The body's running away and desiring all sorts of things centered on itself. Do you understand? Without being governed by heart and love. So we have to get our body under control. But in the end, we are not just a spiritual being, we're also a physical being. So they need to harmonize with one another. We need to get them in harmony with one another in order to resemble God. So the heart of God lying behind His internal character, And the energy of God, this pre-energy. So the heart of God, if you like, which lies behind the plans of God, the ideas of God, the creative concepts that lie behind the creation, the lawful nature out of which God created a creation which is very lawful, very patterned, very mathematical and so on. This heart guided the energy or motivated the energy, and then that came into the act of creation. From the combination of these two, creation came into being. These two united together to bring forth an energy out of which creation came, which was guided and rooted by heart. So, who is God? God is that original creator. Why the owner? Because it's God's love and investment of self which lays behind the whole creation. God poured all his heart, all his sincerity, all his being into the act of creation. So, a good craftsman, a sincere person, the work that they do, they put their heart and soul and being into it. And then it becomes something enormously satisfying. So if you've ever had a job where you couldn't put your heart and soul and being behind it because you didn't believe in it, or because it didn't require you to give a lot, do you understand? Then that's... But sometimes even simple things, if you put your heart and soul behind it, they become precious. First time I ever met this teaching, I was a university student, I went to the teaching, and I got so much from the teaching, but also I got a lot from the people. And I felt so lucky, so blessed, so fortunate. I felt like I received so much. And then in this workshop they said, would anybody like to help? I'd like to help, because I felt I got so much, I wanted to give something back. So then I found out helping was going to do the washing up. David was just remarking earlier, we don't have to do the washing up here because we're in a hotel. But I did the washing up then, like I never washed up in my life before. Why? Because I never liked washing up. But then this washing up became me giving my love back to God. And also because of what I learned, I was loving the dishes, and I was loving the knives, and I was loving the forks. And I felt I should really take care of them. And then it was such a rewarding thing to do, because it got really connected to my heart, which was really connected to my sense of gratitude to God and other people. So I wanted to serve the community, and I wanted to show my love for God by the way I washed the dishes. Do you understand? It became very, very precious. So in the same way then, what God does is not just some casual action. Everything which God the Creator did springs from heart. Everything which God is and everything which God does is springing from that origin. God's energy is not random energy. God's energy is directed by that purpose and intention. So next point, I'm really way behind now. Another set of dual characteristics which we find present in everything that exists is masculinity and femininity. So let's examine that. Well, yes, sure. We have men and we have women, that's clear. There's a nice picture of a man and a woman. There's a nice picture of a male lion. A few lions yesterday, right? There's the male lion and the female lion. So it's not just human beings that are male and female, but animals, of course also plant life, in there you've got stamens and pistils. You've got feminine aspects and masculine aspects. In fact, life is this incredible dynamic. Isn't it extraordinary? From a seed, a plant grows. And in the flower of that plant, there's a stamen and a pistil, masculine and feminine. They have interaction with one another. Another seed is formed. From that seed grows a plant which has a flower, stamen and pistil. They join together again, new seed. This is an extraordinary, origin, coming into two divided aspects, male and female, positive and negative, which then interact with one another, create a new outcome, which is their union of the two, but also in turn then becomes a new origin to start this process again and again and again and again. So such is the nature of everything. And not only in human life, animal life and plant life, but also in inanimate things, in the relationships within molecular, atomics, and particle structures. We see this connection between positively charged and negatively charged, interacting with one another. in relationship with one another. And through their relationship with one another, through the way they interact with one another, they form the molecule, the atom, or the particle. So this is one of several of these illustrations here are from Dr. David Hanna. You see some nice ones in here. This is one about owls. This is an owl. Nobody said they were an owl yesterday. In my culture, owl is associated with wisdom. And this is two owls. And you can't see it here, but one's a male owl and one's a female owl. And one says to wit. Now this is the English expression. So you may have a different expression in your language, but in English we say to wit, to woo. To wit is the male call and to woo is the female call. So I believe, I've not examined this, but I have this on higher authority from Dr. David Hanna. So this is the male communicating with the female, right? And then, wow, different. This is different, isn't it? This is masculine and feminine in the human form. So very, very elegant, beautiful female form in the classical ballet, right? And then here's the masculine form. Different type of expression, different type of beauty, different type of energy is involved in that. But where does the whole thing become most beautiful? It's when masculine and feminine energies come together, in the dance and interact with one another. Then that is, so men are always lifting up the women and doing all these things in the dances, right? The interplay between the energy of the masculine and the energy of the feminine. Similarly in the natural world again, the force of nature, and positive and negativity, and the electric discharge and the storm. So this is present in everything. What does it mean therefore? It means it's present within God. If it's present in the universe, and the universe has masculinity and femininity, which combine together in existence. So again, this is saying masculine and femininity make a whole. Man is just half, woman is just half. A whole reflection of humanity is masculine and feminine bound together in oneness, where men and women meet in love, essentially. And similarly in all things, positivity and negativity bound together. Why is everything in the universe like that? Because everything in the universe comes from a common origin. What is that common origin? That common origin is the first cause, the original cause. What is that original cause? That original cause is God. Everything in creation is similar because it's coming from the same origin. So God has masculinity and femininity. What an interesting idea. God created man in his own image. Male and female, he created them. So who is God? God is the original masculine God. You remember we talked before about God as the God of heart and energy, which makes God the true owner. Now we're talking about God as the God of masculinity and femininity. Maleness and femaleness bound together in love. So who is God also? God is the parents of humanity. God is the original parents of humanity as the creator, because God has this masculine and feminine aspects bound together. This is a very deep topic and we'll touch on it more in a minute. So who are we then? Any being has both the dual characteristics of internal character and external form. These two, right? But also the dual characteristics of masculinity and femininity, which are in relationship with each other, right? They're not isolated, they're together. And similarly here. So we know about this one, the external form. So we have masculine external form and feminine external form, men and women, for example. But in that external form, there's something which typifies, typical of the two different types. So, for example, the masculine form and the feminine form are different. So we associate this more with softness and this more with strength. Maybe this is with endurance in a sense and softness. This is with strength and more square, more sort of that type of structure, more rounded, something like this. But this is also a reflection, because this is an external expression of that, then this external form also is present invisibly in the internal character. So the feminine internal character is different from the masculine internal character. Of course, having said that, all human beings are unique, right? So yes, we can a category, if you like, as feminine women, category that's masculine men, but all men are different from one another, all women are different from one another too. But we can see some qualities, God-given qualities expressed in this way. So that internal character also expresses itself through the external form. Isn't it interesting? The softness of the mother, very important aspect in a way, because there's a very special role in love and in life, and the strength of. Anyhow, I don't want to sometimes people get worried about stereotypical, you heard this expression, stereotypical?
Yes.
Not saying, you have to play with motor cars and she has to play with dollies, this type of issue or worry. But in a sense, of course, clearly, we're performing different aspects in life. And anyhow, that's a very deep topic. I certainly don't have time to look at that. So you can see here, masculine internal nature, masculine external form, masculine being man. Feminine internal nature, feminine external form, feminine being man. So so the whole of the created world is a visible expression of the invisible God. But in a sense, what the principle is saying is human beings are a manifestation of God in image. Things are a manifestation of God in symbol. Sometimes also Father Moon says people are like a map of God. And things are like a flag of God. A nation can be represented by a flag, it's like a symbol. But a map of a nation can have all sorts of things in it, much more detailed, much more direct representation. So we look at humanity to understand God more closely, because human beings are a more close representation or external expression of God. So who is God then? God is a masculine expression and a feminine expression in us, but also that originates from a masculine and feminine nature within God, which are interacting with one another within God. So who is God then? God's heart expresses itself in this way. God is, in a sense, our father and our mother. Why have we used this expression so often certainly in Judeo-Christian expression, we talk of God as him or he. It's because in relationship to the creation, God is the creator, so the subjective being. But actually, God must be a harmonization of masculinity and femininity, because everything that exists is. So certainly, woman's nature is rooted in God. There's been a big thing in human history about men and men's roles opposed to women's roles and imbalances and so on. Very interesting point. So also because God invests his heart through the way that his energy and his word or his concepts or his laws combine with one another. God, through his investment of heart, utilizing his energy, God is not only the true owner and the true parent, but also the true teacher. I'm going to stop there, and I apologize if I've gone a bit over. There is more to do even, but David's rushing up to the front now.